Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz drummer Aaron Comas. He's a well-versed musician who just released his 2018 CD called Sculptures, and it's full of very interesting sonic textures. He talked to us about his childhood in Dallas, Texas, and being influenced by the likes of Miles Davis, Coltrane, the Stones, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, and so many others. He is a founding member of the Grammy-nominated 10 million-plus album-selling band, the Spin Doctors, and he has played on or written or produced with over 200 albums with the likes of Joan Osborne, Isaac Hayes, Marc Cohn, and so many others. He talked about a very well-worn journey in music and so much more. So please get to know him and dig this interview, my friends.
Thank you for taking a minute out. I've really wrapped my head around your album and aspects of your career, and I want to start off with this. Talk to me about this album. It's an interesting sound for a new modern jazz album. I don't think it's something that people will be like, wow, that has all of the elements that they're used to with jazz. So talk to me about this album and how you got to this jazz oasis in your life at this point.
Well, ever since I was really young, I've always been very much into jazz. At a young age, I was exposed to it, all the way back to junior high school, playing in the big band. And I went to a performing arts high school called the Arts Magnet in Dallas, Texas. And I played in the combos there, and I played in the big bands. We won all kinds of Downbeat DB awards back then. There was a lot of great people there. I went to high school with Roy Hargrove. And I've always kind of been equally into, listening to and playing music in the style of John Coltrane and Miles Davis, as I was into bands like Zeppelin and the Who and the Stones and all that. So I've always kind of had a mixed bag. Obviously I moved up to New York here about almost 30 years ago, believe it or not, to go to the New School. They just started a great jazz program led by the great sax player Arnie Lawrence. The faculty was incredible. I was in small groups with Jim Hall and Reggie Workman, and I took private lessons with Bernard Purdy, and Jimmy Cobb was there. It was just you're walking into the halls with the jazz giants teaching. It was just an incredible opportunity. And when I moved to New York, I was basically kind of equally into having a career as a jazz musician, a guy in a rock band, or a studio guy. I've always kind of really just loved all those different aspects and put a lot of work into my own musicianship to be ready for that. And pretty soon after I moved to town, I met the guys in the Spin Doctors and we formed the band. I made a conscious decision to kind of give a go with that. And obviously that went really well. And so it kind of consumed me, particularly through the 90s. It was really, just took up 100% of my time. And over the last 15 or so years, even though the band's still going, in fact, I'm getting ready to get on a plane and fly to Arizona today for a gig with them tomorrow, I've had a lot more time to do a lot of the other things that I always wanted to do, like play on other people's records and do studio stuff, play with other artists like Joan Osborne and a lot of great people that I work with, and also get back into doing more jazz stuff. I've always kind of been under the radar in New York City with playing jazz gigs. And about 10 years ago, I decided to start making my own records. I've always been really into composition, and I wanted to start making my own music, just something that really represented me fully. And I've made a couple of them. I made a record in 2006 called Catskills Cry. I made two more with kind of the current live group I have now with Teddy Kumpel, a great guitar player, Richard Hammond. And I did a straight-ahead jazz quintet record live at Smoke Jazz Club a few years ago. And then I met this guy, started working with this guy named Leon Grombaum, who plays this instrument called Centillion, which is pretty prominent on this record. I met him in another sort of jazz-oriented group called the New York Electric Piano, which I've been associated with for about 15 years. And we have about, 8 or 9 records, one of which just came out. And about 3 or 4 records ago, Leon played on that. And I just remembered how interesting and cool this guy was. And over the last couple of years, I started another group called the Air Conditioned Gypsies, which is kind of an improvisational collective of musicians in New York City. And I always use different musicians. I've used Vernon Reid on a lot of them. I've done some double drums on those. Mark Juliana did a couple of them. Jojo Mayer did a couple. I've always used Leon's the one guy that I always use in that band, but it's always different players. About a year and a half ago, I got thinking okay, I want to make another record. I wanted to make it a little bit different from my other ones, which were always kind of compositionally based songs that I write on guitar. I write most of my music on guitar. And I wanted to kind of figure out a way to kind of blend what I'd been doing, but add more of the improvisational elements, and a little more of this sort of modern thing that I've been getting into, which Leon is a real big part of that sound. So it all kind of led to this, and this record, Sculptures, which just came out, is kind of I look at it as kind of having this kind of three different parts musically. And I recorded a lot more. I think it's about 38 minutes of music, but I probably recorded at least 90 minutes of music. And I've always kind of liked records that were short and didn't have a lot of filler. And just for me as an artist, I just wanted to make something that where everything just really felt right, which is why it came down to this 38 minutes. But the three different sections, it started with a series of improvisations with just me and Leon in my studio. And like, for instance, the title track, Sculptures, which is the first song on the record, was just an improvisation that me and Leon did. We got together a few days, and I just wanted to do like these really kind of short improvs. And they all had they weren't just like, okay, let's do whatever we want. They basically always had some sort of concept up front, whether it was a tonal center or some sort of motif, or even if it was just a rhythmic motif, and we would kind of discuss it, and we would do it. And Sculptures just really gelled, that one song. We kind of took that improvisation and we just built very slightly on it. The only thing that we added was I had Leon do like some bass Chilean, which is kind of like, has that kind of moogie bass sound. And then this great guitar player named Gray McMurray came in and played on top of it. And there's about a third of the record is that sort of idea, these short improvs. And then there's a couple songs that are a little more of my typical kind of acoustic guitar compositional thing. I think two of the songs on the record are like that, which I played the acoustic guitar on. And then the third part was sort of a live session with myself, with Leon, an amazing piano player named Ollie Rockberger, John Davis on bass, and then we recorded together some compositions I had written, and then Gray came in and played on top of it. And that's basically kind of the short version of how this thing all came together.
My initial instinct, my initial feeling when I listen to this album is the word grandiose comes to mind, because I don't know that anybody that just gets a modern jazz CD is going to expect this sound. So my question to you is this: how would you define the sound that you're going for on this album?
It's always hard to put a label on things. I always just describe it as like, people say, well, what is it? And it's hard to I don't want to call it jazz. I don't want to call it rock. I mean, jazz is a very broad term, especially these days. And I've always described my music as instrumental music. I like things that have a really strong mood to them. I'm a big fan of a lot of the records that Daniel Lanois has done. He's put out he puts out these instrumental records every couple of years, and I really love those. And I think I wanted a record that just had the most important thing on this record to me was that it just had a really, really strong vibe to it. I wanted every song individually and the record as a whole to just set a really strong mood and have a really kind of cool vibe. And it's a hard thing to describe. That's kind of what I was going for. Yeah, I mean, I really put the vibe front and center. Like, normally my record, it's all about the composition. My attitude has always been I want to be able to play it on an acoustic guitar and have it sound just like a really good song. I play with so many great singer-songwriters, and I'm a guy that's in a band. I'm a real lover of songs. So when I first started making my own records, I kind of took that same attitude. It's like, I want this to just really present itself great on just the guitar by itself before we play with all the instruments, and then we'll hopefully improve it from there. But so the song was always front and center, and in this case, I really although the song was so important, I really tried to make the vibe like the main attraction.
Well, and I didn't want to shackle this down with a label, so you saying strong mood and vibe, I think that's the perfect level of somewhat ambiguity that kind of makes total sense, because that's what it is. You get really wrapped up into a grandiose feeling with this. So before I depart the present and go into your childhood in Dallas, I just want to ask you this. I've talked to a lot of crossover musicians that have gone from a big, huge limelight to the roots of what they were used to, say, jazz, for instance. Were you chomping all of those years to get back to your roots of jazz, or were you just kind of like, I'm going to take all of this in, grow, and then eventually get back to it?
Yeah, it was really more like that, because the truth is all those years when, people just saw me out with the Spin Doctors, you got to remember, I've been in New York City for 30 years, so I was always coming back to town and doing jazz gigs, playing in little clubs with people. So, although playing that style of music wasn't like in the forefront, certainly of my career. It's always been there. It's always been something I've done. It's always been something I've had great interest in. So it's been nice, though, at this point to have been able to to do these kind of records and have my own band now, and play a lot around town. And it's really just become kind of like, it's nice to be able to get to a point where you create your own thing, and it's just kind of the ultimate means of my own expression, as an artist. And so it's been a real pleasure to have this, as something I do now.
Talk to me about growing up in Dallas. How did you get into music, and more specifically, jazz?
Well, I started playing drums when I was 9, and I basically just told my parents that I wanted to take some drum lessons. And I kind of lucked out. There was a guy named Jack Iden that they found at a local music store called Brook Mays. And I started studying with him when I was 9, and he was great. He made me basically just play a practice pad and a snare drum for the first couple of years. So right from the get-go, I learned I was just getting into rudiments and reading and working on developing my hands. And he wouldn't even let me get a drum set, which I hated at the time, but I'm so grateful to him now for doing that. So I spent my first couple of years with him, and then I finally got a drum set, and I was just lucky to have some great teachers. I studied with a guy named Rick Latham for a while, and then I studied with Henry Oxtell, who's the head of the drum department up at North Texas State University. I went to the Arts and Science High School, which I was so lucky to play in small groups and big bands and all these great musicians every day. And outside of that, being at the school, there was this whole group of friends that were all musicians. So we would just jamming all the time, and everybody was into different things. And this is like in the 80s, so we were all into rock, and we're all like really into, Miles Davis and all that stuff. And I was getting into more of the straight ahead jazz as well. The whole idea of improvisation has always been a really major part of my musical upbringing from really young, because we used to just have these jam sessions at our house and at parties and just improv, so really, ingrained into my musical makeup, from an early age, just playing like cool, creative kind of stuff. And it's stuck with me.
Without a doubt. The one thing that's very important about any musician is good teachers early on, and you've been mentioning teachers. My question is this: is there any advice that you got that really resonated with you throughout the years that just always came back to you?
There's a couple things. I mean, you're absolutely right. I feel really, really lucky to have had those good teachers. I think, just getting your shit together, being prepared, I was lucky that I learned how to read music, and I was lucky that I had people that really encouraged me to learn different styles of music, even if it wasn't. I mean, I'm lucky because I actually legitimately love playing all styles of music. But I think even if you want to just be a jazz musician or just a rock musician, whatever style it is, unfortunately, you see a lot of people, especially in the music world, where they cop an attitude and they just kind of write off a whole other style of music because it's not what they want to do. And I always think that's a big mistake, because, I mean, you look at the greatest rock musicians and they have a wide spectrum of things at the facility, And same thing with jazz musicians. I mean, most of the really great jazz musicians that I know and have met over the years just had a really open mind and loved everything. You never heard them talking bad about people or, so I think that's important. And that was kind of ingrained in me early on. And also, I had great advice growing up in Dallas with my teacher, Henry Oxtell, was like, he's like, look, it's really obvious that you're really serious about this. And you could stick around Dallas and you could do fine. But if you really want to achieve what it seems like you want to achieve and have, make really great music with the best musicians in the world and have a really good career, then you really need to get out of Dallas. And I would recommend you move to New York or LA. And that was put in my mind early. And I chose New York mainly because of the jazz thing, because so many of the people that I really, looked up to lived here. And it attracted me to move to New York. And that was, that was incredible advice. So I think, look, you got to work really hard. You got to practice really hard. You got to keep a really open mind. And you got to set some goals and figure out how you're going to reach them. And, and also be willing to take a left turn at any point. But if you're prepared, and the best time to get prepared, it's never too late. There's no question. Those younger years it's the best time to really, you have the time, to practice 10 hours a day and play all day. And just, thinking those kind of things were really ingrained in my head, early, and I couldn't thank all these teachers and people enough for that.
You did touch on something I think that is very key about the world of jazz that I've noticed. There's a real lack of ego. There's a real open-mindedness. There's a there's a lot of humble cats that are in this profession. So I ask you this. Is it refreshing to be around the jazz world to kind of feel that kind of that absence of ego and just kind of everybody's in it because we're musicians? Not saying other genres don't do that, but there seems to be a real prevalence in the jazz world like that.
Yeah, I think it's a good time for, I think generally there's just so much creative music going on these days. And I think one of the reasons why people are more open these days is because it's different than it was 30 years ago. I mean, I think because everything is coming together so much more now. I mean, and what jazz is really changed because, people get older and the younger people get involved and get interested. And so the tastes change. And I remember meeting people earlier on, it was like jazz. Anything else sucked. If it wasn't bebop, it was horrible. And that attitude really does not exist anymore. Maybe a little bit, but very, very, I think the younger generation has really just opened up the whole attitude. So I see I think you're right. I think you're just seeing people are more humble about it now. And I mean, you got to be. It's to make a decision to be a musician of any type is a courageous decision. It's a difficult life, on any level, no matter how successful you are or not or whatever. Everybody has ups and downs. It's a difficult business, but we do it because we love it, and we all are into this together. So I'm very encouraged by not only the level of talent that's out there, the type of music that's being made, and just people's attitude in general, I think, is better than ever, which is really, really great. It really hasn't always been that way, unfortunately.
You're kind of a musical chameleon. You talked about you've traversed through a lot of different musical genres and played with Joan Osborne and Marc Cohn and jazz musicians, Isaac Hayes, all of these different musicians in different settings. Has all of this enhanced you as a musician and made you stronger now that you're in kind of more of a jazz mode?
Absolutely. I mean, like I said, I've just been, I'm grateful to have gotten the opportunities to play a lot of these people, and I love it. And I look at it all pretty much the same. I mean, even though it's kind of like in different languages, you learn to speak different languages, and with music, I think it's important to really respect all the different genres and study them, but then also be willing to break them. That's the beauty of jazz, is there's really no rules. Jazz is wide open. You can do whatever you want, and that's what my music's about. It's an opportunity for me to really just kind of throw everything that I've ever learned and like together and not have to worry at all about really any kind of genre. We're just trying to create our own. I think that's really what jazz, to me, that's what the word jazz means. But, in playing with like a lot of other artists, like a guy like in the band, like the Spin Doctors, or working with an artist like Joan, you have to respect that music. And I love that as well, going in and playing with different people and trying to make their music really great. And I think that having the opportunity to have done a lot of this stuff has been really, really valuable for me, for sure. And I try to bring all my different experiences into everything I do, and know when to do what and when not to do what. That's really what it's all about, respecting the music.
So along with good teachers, seeing live shows has to be a great educational aspect of what you probably do as a musician. What are some of the live shows that you've witnessed that really had a profound impact on you?
Well, listen, that was one of the other reasons I wanted to move to New York. When I came to New York, I moved here late 88. I just went and saw everybody I could, and I was so lucky. I must have seen Elvin Jones 20 times. I got to see Tony Williams before he passed away. I've seen Roy Haynes 25 times. I missed his show. He just played here this week, but I did see him last year. I think he just turned 93. But I think about seeing, to me, those three guys are like the kings of drumming, jazz drumming. I mean, Roy Haynes, Tony Williams, and Elvin Jones. And to get to sit, 2 feet away from those guys on so many occasions here in New York, it was just amazing. It was incredible. I'll never forget it. Not to mention so many others. I mean, I saw Max Roach, just tons of people. And those things they're life-changing, especially when you're young, you come up here and you can listen to records from these guys, and then you get to sit in the New York City club, right in front of them. Is amazing. So that had a major impact on me, just to be able to witness that in person.
So let's get fantastical and say the Jazz DeLorean pulls up in front of your house. You punch the digits in. You go anywhere, any place in time. Who are you going to go see? Where are you going to go?
It'd be 2 bands that I'd want to see. It would be, the Miles Band with Tony Williams, Ron Carter, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, that period, and then it would be the Coltrane Band with Elvin Jones, Jimmy Garrison, and McCoy Tyner. So, yeah, I don't think I could pick between the two, but those are my 2 favorite bands in any style ever. I listen to that music almost on a daily basis. You know, I love all those records from that period. If I could go back in time, that would be where I'd go to check it out.
Beautiful. Right on. Let me ask you this. Why do you love jazz?
I just love the freedom of the expression, you know, the freedom of the way that style of music. I like music that's free and people can express themselves 100% the way they want to with no restrictions. And I think not all jazz is like that. There's a lot of jazz that's not, but certainly the two groups that I just mentioned is a great example of that. And to me, again, it's not so much about when I say jazz, just because I'm mentioning John Coltrane or Miles, which are my two favorites, it's like there's so much stuff. Just the idea of having that freedom, you know, inside of this music it's what I love about it. So when I get the opportunity to play any kind of music with that freedom, it's like my favorite thing to do.
So when you stand at kind of the nexus of your life right now, you look back at what you've done, and then you look ahead at what you want to do. Are you a happy guy? Are you happy with what's happened up to this point?
Yeah, you know, I am. I mean, but at the same time, I still have, I think part of trying to be, the goal is always to be a great musician. I mean, I think that goal should never end. So I think frustration is a big part of always trying to reach that goal. So I often feel frustrated, but I think I've gotten to the point where I realize that frustration is a good thing. And I practice a lot. I still go to my studio and practice as much as possible. And I've learned that, like, when you're practicing, it's good to be frustrated. You know, if you sound great when you're practicing, you're not really practicing. You know, so for the most part, yeah, I look at if I don't beat myself up like we all do, I look at my career and I think I'm very lucky. I've done well, and I'm in a good place right now because all the different kind of things that I've had the time to work on. One, being a band guy in the Spin Doctors. You know, two, being a side guy and a session guy, getting to work with a lot of different artists live in the studio. And three, now having my own, being an artist and making my own records and having my own band. You know, it's taken me that long to the point where all those three things are actually up and running, which they are now. So as from a creative point of view, it's a good place to be, you know. But, you know, the goal is just to keep it going. I mean, I want to keep improving. I want to keep making great music. And, again, the main reason I moved to New York 30 years ago was to get my ass kicked and play with the greatest musicians in the world and always be inspired. And that is as alive today as it was then, you know, especially with the younger generation. And you can't just sit around and rest on your laurels, man, if you want to keep growing, you know. So I'm happy to be here.
So let me ask you this. This is my final question. Everyone has a perception of you, your family, your friends, your fans, but you're running the ship. Who do you think you are?
Oh, God, I don't know. You know, you just try to be a good guy, honest. You know, I hope that people think of me as somebody that, you know, is an honest person and makes good music. And, you know, I do what I want to do. I try to work with people that I like working with. You know, at this point, I don't want to put myself in a situation where I'm not going to be creatively fulfilled. It's not worth it. I've kind of always tried to make good decisions with what I do. But I don't know. That's a tough question, you know. You know, I try to do my best, you know, and show up and be easygoing. And, you know, at least as a musician, you know, I want to always show up and be prepared and do a great job. And as a person, you know, you want to be, I hope that I'm somebody that's easy to be around and not a hassle, you know, because, you know, when you're making music and you're working with people or just hanging out with people, nobody wants to be around somebody that's a pain in the ass, you know. So I've always tried to be low-key and chill and just do my thing.
Right on. Great answer, man. Aaron, thank you for taking some time out. Thank you for all the music. I really appreciate it.
Hey, man, thanks for listening and thanks for chatting. It's been a real nice chatting with you.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in Dallas, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Aaron for his cool, his honesty, and being so good to give his time to Neon Jazz. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store. Visit neonjazz at youtube.com. And for everything Neon Jazz, go to the neonjazz.blogspot.com. Until next time, enjoy the jazz, my friends.
Neon Jazz.